We all see our lives as stories, it seems to me, and I am convinced that psychologists and sociologists and historians and so on would find it useful to acknowledge that. If a person survives an ordinary span of 60 years or more, there is every chance that his or her life as a shapely story has ended, and that all that remains to be experienced is epilogue. Life is not over, but the story is. My first ancestor named Vonnegut arrived in Indianapolis slightly before the Civil War, 1855, perhaps, and he was a merchant. And he proposed to sell silk, and I believe everything he wore, except his shoes, was made of silk when he arrived in Indianapolis, showing how much he believed in this substance. But he soon started a general store selling shovels and pickaxes and rifles and all that. And when I was a child, there was this large hardware store in Indianapolis, the Vonnegut Hardware Company. I, in fact, worked there as an elevator operator and working in stockrooms and so forth when I was a boy. We talked about the branch of the family, the hardware branch, and we felt superior to it, as my grandfather had been an architect, was an architect. My father became his partner in architecture, and the Great Depression hit, and there was no business done in architecture as buildings stopped. And so my father, when I knew him, was a demoralized man, as there was no work for him to do. And he had every reason to be grumpy and melancholy, as there was no way for him to make a living. And so he was in a state of embarrassment when I knew him. And during the Depression, when people were looking for radical solutions to economic problems, it became a technocratic family. As they believed that scientists and engineers and mathematicians should run the world, that they were the only people with common sense.
This is automation, today's way of manufacturing. This is the challenge for today, to meet competition and rising costs by moving step by step towards automation, continuous automatic production.
General Electric found me when I was working in Chicago. I was a newspaper reporter there, and they got the idea of having real journalists working for them, writing newspaper stories about discoveries at General Electric. I had a family and wasn't making nearly enough money to support the family. So I started writing short stories on weekends, and there was an enormous magazine industry at that time which paid very high prices for stories, and they needed lots of them. A Saturday Evening Post published 5 a week, Collier's published 5 a week, Liberty published 5 a week, and they paid tons of money for them. And so I began that way, and I wrote one, and the Saturday Evening Post bought it and paid me 1/8 of what I was making at General Electric a year. And so I wrote another one, and they paid me more. And in a period of a few months, I had made more money than General Electric was prepared to pay me all year, as I had money piled up. I've never been this rich, as there was all this unused currency all over the house that would come by mail. And so that's how I began, and that opportunity doesn't exist now for American writers. The temptation of that big magazine money, too, was part of a learning machine. You are penalized immediately for any errors. And writing for the magazines, they told me an awful lot about how to tell a story. Because I would mail off a story and wait for the money to come, and the money wouldn't come. The story would come back instead, and they would tell me what was wrong with it. And they were right. Breakfast of Champions is a tale of a meeting of two lonesome, skinny, fairly old white men on a planet which was dying fast. One of them was a science fiction writer named Kilgore Trout. He was a nobody at the time, and he supposed his life was over. He was mistaken. He became one of the most beloved and respected human beings in history. I do know who invented Kilgore Trout. I did. I made him snaggle-toothed. I gave him the same legs the creator of the universe gave to my father when my father was a pitiful old man. They were pale white broomsticks. They were hairless. They were embossed fantastically with varicose veins.
Tell me about Kilgore. Where did he come from? Where did you invent him from?
I think psychologically, Kilgore Trout is what I thought I might become. Is when I say I noticed how poor science fiction writers were. I was one of them at the time, and I was as poor as any of them and as scared. One woman did a learned article on me. I do not know her, but she has a doctorate in literature, and she is a critic. And she said that Kilgore in the different books represents my psychological state in each of the books. And Kilgore really holds very different sorts of jobs and is described very differently from book to book, and I think that's right. He is a measure of how I felt. One Trout story was about a tragic failure to communicate. Here was the plot. A flying saucer creature named Zog arrived on Earth to explain how wars could be prevented and how cancer could be cured. He brought the information from Margot, a planet where the natives conversed by means of farts and tap dancing. Zog landed at night in Connecticut. He had no sooner touched down than he saw a house on fire. He rushed into the house, farting and tap dancing, warning the people about the terrible danger they were in. The head of the house brained Zog with a golf club.
Why is Kilgore so alone? Why is he so isolated?
I've thought a little about it, and I think Kilgore is suspicious of human families. I think he fears pressure on thought, that he wants to be free, to be an original thinker, and to think of all mankind instead of just a limited group. It seemed to me that science fiction writers were writing about the most important issues of our time. Is that the mainstream writers and those most respected by critics were still dealing with the subtleties of human character and motivation and all that. And meanwhile, we had created these monstrous engines and social schemes and so forth, which are having more influence on us than anything else. So I created Kilgore Trout to say, maybe these guys can't write so well, but they're sure talking about what needs to be talked about.
Voltaire, von Braun, unimportant, von Grunbaum, von Hagen, Vonnegut, Jr. Player piano, no, I'm not there. Mother Night, no, I'm not in that. Sirens of Titan, no. Slaughterhouse 5 or The Children's Crusade, I'm in that. Jailbird, I'm there. God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, I'm in that. Slapstick or Lonesome No More, no. Breakfast of Champions or Goodbye Blue Monday. Ah, that's the one that's all about me.
And 2 months after Trout received his first fan letter, I had him find in his mailbox an invitation to be a speaker at an arts festival in the American Middle West.
You come highly recommended by Elliot Rosewater, who assures me that you are perhaps the greatest living American novelist.
Trout laughed at the flattering invitation, but he felt fear after that. Once again, a stranger was tampering with the privacy of his body bag.
$1,000, Bill.
He put this question to his parakeet haggardly, and he rolled his eyes.
Why this sudden interest in Kilgore Trout, Bill? Bill. They not only want me, Bill, they want me in a tuxedo. Maybe they want me, Bill, because they know I've got a tuxedo. What do you think, Bill? Yeah, Bill. It's $1,000 check, Bill. I've never seen so much money.
Letter here from Playboy from Christy Hefner, and she's a friend of yours, huh?
Mm-hmm. I photographed her for life.
Yeah, well, I've never met her, or her father. But they want to give me some kind of prize out there.
Great.
Well, let's find out what it is. It's a literary arts ball which benefits the Chicago Library, and they want me to be the first recipient of the Chicago Public Library Freedom to Read Award. Trout got his tuxedo. It had a greenish patina of mold. Some of the growths it supported resembled patches of fine rabbit fur.
This should do nicely for evenings, Bill.
Said Trout. He dabbed at his tuxedo with a damp rag, and the fungi came away easily.
Hate to do this, Bill.
He said of the fungi he was murdering.
Fungi have as much right to life as I do. They know what they want, Bill. Damned if I do anymore.
Then he thought about what Bill himself might want. It was easy to guess.
Bill,
He said,
I like you so much, and I'm such a big shot in the universe, that I am going to make your biggest wish come true.
he opened the door of the cage, something Bill couldn't have done in 1,000 years. Trout closed the door of the cage and latched it.
Bill, that is the most intelligent use of a wish I ever heard of. You made sure you still had something worth wishing for to get out of that cage.
I don't mind people calling me Kilgore, and most authors' reluctance about the books being about my life is authors conventionally say that, you know, that laymen are so stupid to think that I'm talking about my own life. My position is it's all I have to talk about, and I'll take full responsibility for having experienced every event in any book. I would hate to tell you what this lousy little book cost me in money and anxiety and time. When I got home from the Second World War 23 years ago, I thought it would be easy for me to write about the destruction of Dresden, since all I would have to do would be to report what I had seen. And I thought, too, that it would be a masterpiece, or at least make me a lot of money, since the subject was so big. But not many words about Dresden came from my mind then. Not enough of them to make a book anyway. Not many words come now, either. when I have become an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls and his sons full grown. Over the years, people I have met often ask me what I'm working on, and I've usually replied that the main thing was a book about Dresden. I said that to Harrison Starr, the movie maker, one time, and he raised his eyebrows and inquired, "Is it an anti-war book?" "Yes," I said, "I guess." You know what I say to people when I hear they're writing anti-war books? No. What do you say, Harrison Starr? I say, "Why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead?" What he meant, of course, was that there would always be wars, and they were as easy to stop as glaciers. I believe that, too. And even if wars didn't keep coming like glaciers, there would still be plain old death.
How
was that?
I think that's the raid. Clearing out the pool tables.
The Americans and their guards and camel took shelter in an echoing meat locker which was hollowed in living rock under the slaughterhouse. Nothing happened that night. It was the next night that about 130,000 people in Dresden would die. So it goes. 2-1.
RAF heavy bombers assist Marshal Conrad's drive into the Reich. The target is Dresden. It was being used to pump German troops into counterattacks against the Russian army not many miles to the east. This strike put a stop to that. The night sky is pitted with aircraft, varicolored target markers, and the newest German attack device, a scarecrow designed to burst and look like a plane exploding after a direct hit. Static electrical discharge caused by intense cold mars these magnificent bombing shots. After these attacks, the German overseas news agency said, "Dresden is a heap of ruins. It has been smashed to atoms."
Slaughterhouse 5 was the only book I felt I really should write because accidentally, as a captured American soldier in Germany, I was present when Dresden was destroyed. I had never seen any other city bombed. It seemed quite elaborate what I had seen there. When I got home, there was nothing in the newspapers about the bombing of Dresden, and so I had to conclude that I really hadn't seen anything very fancy in the war, and as the years went by, it emerged that this was the largest single massacre in European history. 100,000 people or more were killed in a world record time. I don't think human beings had ever been killed that fast, as they weren't killed that fast in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. Since I had been there and since I was a professional writer, I thought, all right, I must say something about this. And so I tried and I tried and I tried, and I wrote parts in a novel suitable for Duke Wayne and Frank Sinatra and perhaps Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and it would not work, and it would not work. And I thought the problem was that there was no discussing a massacre on this order. And then a friend of a war buddy of mine gave me the clue as to how to write this book. What she said was, "You were only children then." So I made my heroes the children that I had in fact been, and all my friends had been over there, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. The thing worked. There were sounds like giant footsteps above. Those were sticks of high-explosive bombs. The giants walked and walked. A guard would go to the head of the stairs every so often to see what it was like outside. Then he would come down and whisper to the other guards. There was a firestorm out there. Dresden was one big flame. The one flame ate everything organic, everything that would burn. It wasn't safe to come out of the shelter until noon the next day. When the Americans and their guards did come out, the sky was black with smoke. The sun was an angry little pinhead. Dresden was like the moon now, nothing but minerals. The stones were hot. Everybody else in the neighborhood was dead. So it goes. Many holes were dug at once. Nobody knew yet what there was to find. There was no machinery. Not even horses or mules or oxen could cross the moonscape. A German soldier with a flashlight went down into the darkness, was gone a long time. When he finally came back, he told a superior on the rim of the hole that there were dozens of bodies down there. Thus began the first corpse mine in Dresden. There were hundreds of corpse mines operating by and by. They didn't smell bad at first, were wax museums, but then the bodies rotted and liquefied, and the stink was like roses and mustard gas. So it goes. And so that's what we were doing, is became corpse miners, and this was an enormous labor, and after a few days had gone by, it was obvious that we weren't going to get nearly all the people out, so a new technique was worked out where we would dig in, open up an air raid shelter, go looking for one, open it up, shine a light in there, that's indeed what it was, and then a German soldier would go down with a flamethrower and cremate the bodies there. But I have, in my time, for a brief period, dealt in enormous numbers of bodies and seen these spectacular pyramids of corpses alternating with wood, which were touched off for health reasons.
In writing the book, one of the most curious literary ideas in it for me is that you should introduce into it a science fiction element, almost a comical element.
The science fiction episodes I tried out. And when you're writing a book, you're not committed to anything. You're not even committed to the book itself. I have thrown away whole books sometimes. And so I experimented with the science fiction idea, using it for relief, is to get some distance from an atrocity of this sort, to see how much it really matters in the long view. And the science fiction thing seemed to work, and it seemed to be amusing, and it seemed to lighten the whole enterprise, so I kept it in. And Billy traveled in time to the zoo in Tralfamadore. He was 44 years old, on display under a geodesic dome. Somebody in the zoo crowd asked him what the most valuable thing he had learned on Tralfamadore was so far. And Billy replied, how the inhabitants of a whole planet can live in peace. As you know, I am from the planet that has been engaged in senseless slaughter since the beginning of time. I myself have seen the bodies of schoolgirls who were boiled alive in a water tower by my own countrymen. This was true. Billy saw the boiled bodies in Dresden. And I have lit my way in prison at night with candles from the fat of human beings. If other planets aren't now in danger from Earth, they soon will be. So tell me the secret so I can take it back to Earth and save us all. How can a planet live at peace? The man assigned to the bed next to Billy's was a former infantry captain named Elliot Rosewater. It was Rosewater who introduced Billy to science fiction, and in particular to the writings of Kilgore Trout. Kilgore Trout became Billy's favorite living author, and science fiction became the only sort of tales he read. Both Billy and Rosewater had found life meaningless, partly because of what they had seen in war. So they were trying to reinvent themselves in their universe. Science fiction was a big help. Trout did something which some people might have considered eccentric. He called mirrors leaks. It amused him to pretend that mirrors were holes between two universes. If he saw a child near a mirror, he might wag his finger at that child warningly and say with great solemnity, "Don't get too near that leak. You wouldn't want to wind up in some other universe, would you?" I've often had characters in a novel refer to Kilgore Trout stories and summarize them in a couple of lines. There's one idea I had that I wanted to put in a book was about this. It was about death and loss and all that, and there's this Earthling expedition way the hell out in space exploring, and the chaplain calls the guy in to tell him that there's bad news from home, and tries to find out, first whether the dog died and whether his sister died. Is it mom or pop? And no, it's your whole galaxy. There were 1 quadrillion nations in the universe, but the nation Dwayne Hoover and Kilgore Trout belonged to was the only one with a national anthem, which was gibberish sprinkled with question marks. Here is what their flag looked like. Trout's employers had no idea that he was a writer. No reputable publisher had ever heard of him, for that matter, even though he had written 117 novels and 2,000 short stories by the time he met Dwayne. He got names and addresses of publishers from magazines devoted to the writing business. He thus got in touch with a firm which published hardcore pornography in Los Angeles, California. They used his stories to give bulk to books and magazines of salacious pictures, and the titles were often changed. Pan-Galactic Straw Boss, for example, became Mouth Crazy.
Swinger parties. To trout. No, to trot. Now it can be told by Kilgore Trout. Forbidden Library. This is it.
He wished to arrive in Midland City as the dirtiest of old men. He was supposed to take part in a symposium out there entitled The Future of the American Novel in the Age of McLuhan. He wished to say at the symposium,
Does this McLuhan, whoever he is, have anything to say about the relationship between wide-open beavers and the sales of books?
For one reason or another, I found it very congenial to write short episodes, short essays, and to separate these by some typographical device. How this came to be, I don't know. Perhaps because of my newspaper training, the newspaper stories are quite short, and once I was through with a story, that, by God, was the story, and there was no more to say. I may pace myself that way. Also, I am fond of jokes, and so my books have tended to be mosaics, being comic novels rather than tragic ones. I learned while studying anthropology that the obsessions vary from society to society, that a society will focus on one need or another that all human beings have. And so I imagined a society where the emphasis was on food, and of course the world is full of such societies right now.
This is how you make the pink teacup cornbread. First, you add your milk. Next, you add 2 eggs, a little water. Then you add your baking powder. Beat it very, very well. Then you put it into the oven, 400 degrees. That is the way that we make the pink teacup cornbread. You'll like it if you just try it now.
I experimented with putting recipes in Dead-Eyed Dick, which is an extremely gloomy book. It just suddenly struck me as a very funny idea. I already had the character a very good cook, and in experimenting with him, is I had him tell the recipe of something he was particularly proud of, It looked very funny on the page. Also, it looked very appetizing. And I realized that this worked as well as music often does in some dramatic production. It's lovely to hear the melody and the relief, and a recipe worked the same way, as almost everybody is crazy about food. I see the world as a visitor from Mars might. So does Kilgore Trout. Kilgore Trout tried to fall asleep in a movie theater in New York City. It was much cheaper than a night in a hotel. Trout had never done it before, but he knew sleeping in movie houses was the sort of thing really dirty old men did. The movie theater where Trout sat showed nothing but dirty movies. Music was soothing. Phantasms of a young man and a young woman sucked harmlessly on one another's soft apertures on the silver screen. And Trout made up a new novel while he sat there. It was about an earthling astronaut who arrived on a planet where all the animal and plant life had been killed by pollution, except for humanoids. The humanoids ate food made from petroleum and coal. They asked Don if dirty movies were a problem on Earth too, and Don said yes. They asked him if the movies were really dirty, and Don replied, as dirty as movies could get. This was a challenge to the humanoids, who were sure their dirty movies could beat anything on Earth. So everybody piled into air-cushioned vehicles, and they floated to a dirty movie house downtown. So the theater went dark and the curtains opened. Then the main feature began. It was about a male and a female and their 2 children and their cat. They ate steadily for an hour and a half. The camera rarely strayed more than a foot from their glistening lips and their bobbing Adam's apples. Then the father put the cat on the table so that he could take part in the orgy too. After a while, the actors couldn't eat anymore. They were so stuffed that they were goggle-eyed. They could hardly move. They said they didn't think they could eat again for a week, and so on. The audience went wild. All my books can be interpreted as ethnography, as I was turned into a wide-eyed traveler by the University of Chicago. As an anthropologist, I learned to stand outside of my own society, and people have said that I am like a Martian visiting the Earth. I was trained to take this attitude when I looked at societies and considered them, and it was easy for me to stand outside my own culture. I've discovered that many people are totally incapable of doing this. It's a parlor trick completely beyond them, and they assume that their culture is so immutable that it's like their skin, that my asking them to stand outside of their culture is like asking them to stand outside their skin. "Where am I?" said Billy Pilgrim, "bound for a time warp which will get us to Tralfamadore in hours rather than centuries." How did I get here? It would take another Earthling to explain it to you. Earthlings are the great explainers, explaining why this event is structured as it is, telling how other events may be achieved or avoided. I am a Tralfamadorian, seeing all time as you might see a stretch of the Rocky Mountains. All time is all time. It does not change. It does not lend itself to warnings or explanations. The bulk of my work was written on Cape Cod, where I lived from 1950 until 1970, and that, in fact, probably was a shank of my creative life. is Mark Twain's creative life was pretty much over by the time he was 56, and I think it's a normal experience for American writers to have done most of their work by then. And I would have been quite content to have created what I did by 1970 when I finally left Cape Cod. I used to walk on the great salt marshes there, and geese would fly up ahead of me, and I would come home from a 4-hour walk feeling wonderful, feeling very healthy and happy, but unchanged. I think it was the deepest sort of sleep, really.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you now because I never stopped dawdling like an 8-year-old on a spring morning on his way to school. Anything can make me stop and look and wonder and sometimes learn. I'm a very happy man. Thank you.
There on the Cape, I would indeed talk to myself, and I have stopped that. I don't know quite why. Afraid of somebody's hearing me do it and taking me to the crazy house, I guess. But as a younger man, I did try out all the speeches, and indeed tried out sentences just to hear what they sounded like and whether they were easily spoken.
Cat's cradle. See the cat's cradle. See where the nice pussy cat sleeps. Meow, meow. He must have surprised himself when he made a cat's cradle out of the string. It reminded him of his own childhood and did something he'd never done before. He tried to play with me. And then he sang, "Rock-a-bye, Catsy, in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. If the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Down will come cradle, Catsy and all." Rock-a-bye, Catsy, in the treetop.
Rock-a-bye, Catsy, in the treetop.
When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. If the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Down will come Catsy, cradle in all. Cat's Cradle is a science fiction novel, and the great whiz-bang science fiction device in the middle of it is a form of frozen water which is stable at room temperature. And if this sort of substance ever got loose on the earth, it would teach all water how to freeze in that way. And the water on the face of the earth would vanish. This novel, too, was inspired by General Electric, by science at General Electric. In those days, it was quite conventional for research scientists to be indifferent about what became of their discoveries, as they were interested only in truth. And I think that the government was very interested in having our scientists feel that they were in no way associated with weapons, and so they would continue to conduct research cheerfully. I worked there as a publicity man with Irving Langmuir, who was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. He was the only one in private industry in those days, and he was maddeningly absent-minded, and it seemed wrong to me in view of some of his discoveries that he should be so indifferent to what became of them. So this dreadful substance, which is discovered by a man who is purely interested in truth, finally winds up in the hands of a dictator. And not to leave you in suspense, the world ends.
I opened my eyes, and all the sea was iced 9. The earth was locked up tight. It was winter, now and forever. Hello, hello, I called through the palace ruins. The awesome winds had torn canyons through the great stone pile. The arch of the palace gate was the only man-made form untouched. Written at its base was a calypso. Someday, this crazy world will have to end, and our God will take things back that he to us did lend. And if on that sad day you want to scold our God, why go right ahead and scold him. He'll just smile and nod. I was born in 1922, and then I had a father and a brother who believed strongly in technology, that the world was going to be remade. And I was an enthusiast for this too, and I wrote one time that I expected that by the time I was 30, that Popular Mechanics magazine would have a color photograph of God on its cover. Science would have cornered God and got him to agree to pose and to answer any questions they might still have. And I was a great believer in truth, scientific truth, and then as I wrote once, then truth was dropped on Hiroshima. And so I was hideously disillusioned, as that is when I lost my innocence, really, is when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and I was with my scientist brother when the news came. It's when we picked up the newspaper. I had come home from the war in Europe and was at home on a furlough, and here the newspaper told about the atom bomb. And my brother knew exactly what this thing was, and that this was not just anything like gunpowder or dynamite or TNT, that this was a new order of destruction. And I mean, people now, as ordinary citizens, only now are realizing how destructive these weapons are, and that they are, in fact, a new order of violence. I am embarrassed. We are all embarrassed. We Americans have guided our destinies so clumsily, with all the world watching, that we must now protect ourselves against our own government and our own industries. We have discovered a brand new method for committing suicide. What is the method? To say nothing and do nothing about what some of our businessmen and military men are doing with the most unstable substances and the most persistent poisons to be found anywhere in the universe. The lies we have been fed about nuclear energy have been as cunningly handcrafted as the masterpieces of Benvenuto Cellini. If we let them, they will kill everything on this lovely blue-green planet with their rebuttals to what we say here today, with their vicious, stupid lies.
Unconscious child with a head cut.
This is St. Vincent 61. Go ahead.
We're transporting an 11-year-old female patient.
I have now seen with my own eyes what a neutron bomb can do to a city. The official story is that an American truck was transporting this American bomb on the interstate, and the bomb went off. There was this flash. It was an accident, supposedly. The truck, if there really was a truck, seems to have been right opposite the new Holiday Inn when the bomb went off. But most of the structures are still left standing and furnished. I am told that every one of the television sets in the new Holiday Inn is still fully operable. We were a party of 4. Ketchum's wife and Felix's wife had declined to come along. They were afraid of radioactivity. We were unable to persuade those superstitious souls that the whole beauty of a neutron bomb explosion was that there was no lingering radiation afterwards.
Felix and I had run into the same sort of ignorance when it was time to bury Mother next to Father in Calvary Cemetery. People refused to believe that she herself wasn't radioactive. They were sure that she would make all the other bodies glow in the dark and that she would seep into the water supply and so on. And I do not see how I can get out of asking this question. Does it matter to anyone or anything that all those peepholes were closed so suddenly? Since all the property is undamaged, has the world lost anything it loved?
What is the purpose of life?
Trot plundered his pockets for a pen or pencil. He had an answer to the question, but he had nothing to write with.
The purpose of life? To be the eyes and ears and conscience of the creator of the universe. You fool!
My wish is to be a good citizen. It's something my father was. He was a useful man in the community, and so were all my ancestors in Indianapolis. They were civically active, and I wanted to be of use to my community. And I went to school, publicly supported school in Indianapolis, in a very idealistic time in this country. In the 30s, the Great Depression was going on. We were discussing what can we do to get the country started again, and all sorts of ideas were proposed. Socialist ideas, communist ideas, fascist ideas, whatever. It was in the air, is how can we make America more rational so everybody can work again. And when I left the 8th grade at the very end, as each member of my class at this little school out in Indianapolis declared what he was going to do for his society. I had pledged to do my best to cure cancer, and I've missed that a good deal, but there was one health problem which I could deal with, and which I am dealing with now, usually didactically, but also indirectly in the novel, is firearms is a health problem. They're a terrible health problem in this country and all over the world, of course, in wartime, as these devices should not exist any more than smallpox.
Fashionable bulletproof clothing. Once every 50 seconds in the United States, someone is being robbed or mugged. As one answer, John Jolson Protective Fashion has introduced a unique collection of bulletproof fashions. The jackets and cloaks have easily removable shields, which are optimally effective against a wide array of guns, ranging from a .22 caliber revolver to a .357 caliber Magnum. Now here we have Martin wearing a bulletproof tuxedo shirt and dinner jacket. Craig wears a navy blue hunting jacket with a scarlet bulletproof lining. Sue wears a bulletproof plum-colored ski jacket. Denise and Craig wear bulletproof rainwear. Denise and Sue wear bulletproof Norwegian blue fox and a full-length mink coat, while Craig looks on in his bulletproof tuxedo. Bulletproof fashion may not only save your life, it may change your life.
Well, Dead-Eye Dick takes place in the fictitious city of Midland City, Ohio, the same city in which a Breakfast of Champions takes place. Again, a drab Middle Western manufacturing town. And the story is told by a man who is now 50 years old. His father was a gun collector, a gun nut, a very common American sort, who owned hundreds of beautiful guns and had familiarized his son with them. And the boy was playing with the gun one afternoon after cleaning it. When he was 12 years old, he fired it out a window, partly accidentally, partly intentionally, not intending to hit anything, and he kills a pregnant housewife who is vacuuming her house 6 blocks away. This was Mother's Day to most people, but to me, it was the day during which, ready or not, I had been initiated into manhood. I had killed the chickens. Now I had been made master of all these guns and all this ammunition. It was something to savor. It was something to think about. I had a clip of ammunition in my breast pocket. It had been there since morning. It felt good. So I pushed it down into the rifle's magazine, since I knew the rifle enjoyed that so. Now the rifle was cocked with a live cartridge, snugly home. For a person as familiar with firearms as I was, this represented no commitment whatsoever. I could let the hammer gently down without firing the cartridge, and then I could withdraw the bolt, which would extract the live cartridge and throw it away. But instead, I squeezed the trigger.
Welcome to United Flight 903, non-stop service to Chicago, continuing on to Salt Lake City. In the seat pocket in front of you is a card describing the safety features of this airplane. Please take it out of the pocket and follow along as we cover some very important points.
The London Times. Dead-Eye Dick by Kurt Vonnegut. There's no mistaking the tone. That quirky, rambling, folksy tone which is saying, listen to me, I'm telling you a story. You'll enjoy it. This is Kurt Vonnegut's umpteenth novel. But in Dead-Eye Dick, the writing has become sloppier and the invention more mechanical. The simplicity of the moral vision now seems whimsical. What was once the way of enlightening the reader has now become the easiest way of entertaining him. The sentiment seems arch because over-deliberate, as if all the chaos and confusion which Vonnegut once celebrated has degenerated into an imaginative torpor from which he cannot break free.
Assist your child with an additional mask.
What the critics do, which is very strange, is take your earlier books away from you as though somebody else had written them. Some of the book reviews are like the court-martial of Dreyfus, you know, where they form up the regiment in a hollow square and Dreyfus is marched out there and they pull all these buttons off, you know, which is everything he's done up to then, is all the books I've written up to now, is they pull those off, and then they take my saber, which is the one maybe really good book I wrote, is Slaughterhouse Five. The officer busts it over his knee and hands it back. There's a great resistance, I think, now for people staying around too long or being in the public eye too long. And we classify people as belonging to the 60s or the 70s. We should have people for the 80s now. They could be right. You know, I'm not all that bright, and I can look around and see people writing terrible books, and other people write terrible books. Why couldn't I? I don't consider that impossible.
Trout knew how ridiculous he looked. He expected to be received abominably. Dreamed of embarrassing the festival to death. He wanted to be treated like a cockroach.
Are you a writer?
Yes.
Oh, I'm afraid I don't read as much as I ought to.
Well, we're all afraid of something. Cancer, rats, Doberman pinchers.
I should know, but I don't, so I gotta ask you. What is the most famous thing that you ever wrote?
It's about the funeral of a great French chef. Yeah, all the great chefs of the world were there. It was a beautiful ceremony. Before they closed the casket, they sprinkled parsley and paprika on it.
Oh, it sounds interesting.
Kilgore Trout assumed that the arts festival would still take place that night. He had no money for any form of transportation, so he set out on foot. He began the 5-mile walk down Fairchild Boulevard toward a tiny amber dot at the other end. The dot was the Midland City Center for the Arts. He would make it grow by walking toward it. When his walking had made it big enough, it would swallow him up. There would be food inside. Trout was greeted with luminous adoration. Mr. Trout, they said in rapture. No longer will Midland City be known merely as the home of Mary Alice Miller,
the women's 200-meter breaststroke champion of the world. It will also be the city which first acknowledged the greatness of Kilgore trout. We've tried to survive so long on money and sex and envy and real estate and automobiles and television and alcohol. We are so ready for a renaissance, Mr. Trout. You will be our Leonardo. I had come to the Arts Festival incognito. I was not eager to be recognized. I had bought a pair of sunglasses at a Holiday Inn outside of Ashtabula, Ohio, where I spent the night before. The lenses were silvered, were mirrors to anyone looking my way. Where other people in the cocktail lounge had eyes, I had two holes into another universe. I had leaks. I was on a par with the creator of the universe there in the dark in the cocktail lounge. I shrunk the universe to a ball exactly 1 light year in diameter. I had it explode. I had it disperse itself again. The waitress brought me another drink.
Can you see anything in the dark in those glasses?
The big show is inside my head, I said.
Oh.
She said. I can tell fortunes, I said. You want your fortune told?
Not really.
She said. She went back to the bar, and she and the bartender had some sort of conversation about me, I think. The bartender took several anxious looks in my direction. I did not worry about his asking me to leave the establishment. I had created him, after all. Trout was feeling spooky. All he could see of me was a reflection of candle flames in my mirrored glasses, in my leaks. The thing was, Trout was the only character I ever created who had enough imagination to suspect that he might be the creation of another human being. He had spoken of this possibility several times to his parakeet. He had said, for instance,
Honest to God, Bill, all I can think is, I'm somebody in a book by somebody who wants to write about somebody who suffers all the time.
Here in Chicago, according to the Office of Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association, whereas in the early 1970s, complaints about book banning averaged about 100 per year, in 1981, those same complaints of attempted or actual book banning or book censorship were 1,000 a year. I suppose if you needed one example for the tragic absurdity of censorship, it would be to tell you that on that list of most censored authors is the work of Kurt Vonnegut, Jr. In recognition of his dedication to the preservation of free access to ideas and information, it is with great pleasure that I present this to Kurt Vonnegut, Jr.
I think I'm trying to clear my head of all the junk in there. The assholes, the flags, the underpants. I'm throwing out characters from my other books, too. I'm not going to put on any more puppet shows. I think I'm trying to make my head as empty as it was when I was born onto this damaged planet 50 years ago. I was waiting to intercept Kilgore trout about 6 blocks away. I sat in a Plymouth automobile I had rented from Avis with my Diners Club card. I had a paper tube in my mouth. It was stuffed with leaves. I set it on fire. It was a soigné thing to do. Trout was cantering when I came alongside. I clocked him at 11 miles an hour, which was excellent for a man his age. Whoa, Mr. Trout. Whoa. Whoa, Mr. Trout. Mr. Trout, I said from the unlighted interior of the car, you have nothing to fear. I bring you tidings of great joy. He was slow to get his breath back, so he wasn't much of a conversationalist at first.
Are you from the Arts Festival?
He said. His eyes rolled and rolled. I'm from the Everything Festival, I replied.
Huh?
He said. Mr. Trout, I said, I am a novelist, and I created you for use in my books.
Do you have a gun?
He said. I don't need a gun to control you, Mr. Trout. All I have to do is write down something about you, and that's it. I am going to set at liberty all the literary characters who have served me so loyally during my writing career. Arise, Mr. Trout. You are free. You are free. I might have shaken his hand, but his right hand was injured, so our hands remained dangling at our sides. Bon voyage, I said. I disappeared. I somersaulted lazily and pleasantly through the void, which is my hiding place when I dematerialized. Trout's cries to me faded as the distance between us increased. His voice was my father's voice. I heard my father, and I saw my mother in the void. Here was what Kilgore Trout cried out to me in my father's voice.
Make me young. Make me young. Make me young.